One of the most important tools that a developer can have is their IDE, their developer's environment. And depending on who or when it is that you would have taken C++, the 276 version, you may or may not have used a different solution than we are going to use here. So I just wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about developers' environments and what we're using and why. So I know that when I first started teaching C++ here, it really did mirror the way I took C++ when I was getting either my undergrad or my graduate degree, and that was we did everything on a local machine using the granddaddy of all IDEs, Visual Studio. Now, Visual Studio is... I hate it. I'll tell you the honest to buttons truth, guys. I hate Visual Studio. Number one, Visual Studio is big. You cannot see it, but I am pointing down here at the corpse of my 2015 Surface Book. And one of the reasons it's a corpse is because of the gigantic amount of space that Visual Studio took on here. The default build that we would need to use for C++ development in Visual Studio is 12 to 16 gig of space. Now, it depends if you get C++ and the advanced distributable or just the basic C++ distributable, 12 to 16 gig of space. That's huge. Like, every time I would have to install it, I would have to go through and decide what I had to remove from my laptop to be able to install that again. And all the while it's installing, there is this wealth of DLL, dynamically linked libraries, that go through into the registry for Windows that essentially muck it up. So that was the most historically relevant way that we would do development in C++. Years later, we get a lighter weight development platform, still from Microsoft, called Visual Studio Code. Now, Visual Studio Code cannot compile and run C++ without malarkey, frankly, without a bunch of bullshit malarkey. So that's not a great solution because, number one, not everybody is that interested in always running command line stuff before we test an application. I think that there's a time value associated there. So all that stuff takes away from you being able to code. The time it is that you spend away from code is time you don't get inertia, and it's not great. There's 1,000 essentially text editors now that can edit C++, right? So we can use Atom, which is made by GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft. We could use Brackets. Brackets is made by Adobe for web design, but it actually does C++ natively too. You could use Simple Text, you could use Sublime Text, you could use Notepad++, and all of those suck, honestly, as solutions because none of those allow you to compile and run code. All of those solutions force you, as a student, to zip a folder structure together to submit to me for homework. And that enforces me, as an instructor, to go get 1,000 different little frickin' folders that I have to go through that are all named the same thing. And it was way too work intensive for you, and it's work intensive for me to be able to go through and get anything done with that. We are going to use ReplIT, which is an online IDE that is it's completely and totally legit. It is used by Google. It is used by Microsoft. It is actually used by people developing on the Azure, the Amazon service platform as well. These are my suggestions with ReplIT. It's repl.it, link below. These are my suggestions. Number one, sign up for an account. You do not need an account. Technically speaking, that is true. But if you do have an account and for whatever reason your Chrome window crashes, you don't lose all of your work. So that's the primary benefit to having that. The number two benefit is you can keep everything in folders, and it's fantastic. The added benefit to this is you can send me a piece of your code as a URL. That URL is good everywhere. So I can run it from my iPad. I can run it from a phone if I hated myself that day. I can run it from a Chromebook still if I hated myself that day. You get the idea here. And what that enables us to do is communicate on a piece of code without having to go through files and structures and zipping and messaging and all this other crap. I can simply receive from you a URL, and I will give back to you another URL. And in that URL will be your code, my comments, changes, corrections, directions, what have you. And it makes the back and forth, that academic back and forth we would have, much more easy. The other thing I will tell you about ReplIT is as follows. It has a feature called multiplayer, whereby you and other developers here in the class can collaborate. I will tell you the following thing here, that on the end of chapter assignments and on I'll call them programming challenges, so they are, the end of chapter assignments do this. They slowly build you up towards stuff. And then I put a cap on top of that, a capstone. And that is the programming challenge, where you take what you learned and you apply it in a new and larger way than what we see in the textbook. So those are your projects. You can work on the end of chapter assignments and on the program challenges with other individuals here in the class. Just let me know you're working together. Like, hey, me and so worked on this together, and that's fine. I just need to know who's working with what so I can make sure you all get exactly the same comments. That's it. And multiplayer allows, you in Illinois, me here in Wisconsin, and another developer over in Minnesota. It gives us the opportunity to be in one piece of code at the same time without having to do that back and forth volley of files, which is fantastic. So we are going to use ReplIT, but I will later on down the road mention a couple of things about Visual Studio and a couple of things about things like Xcode, etc., so that you'll see how that works. If you are really going to develop something for a desktop application, you are going to need Visual Studio. You are going to need Visual Studio Code. You are going to need Xcode, but that's not the way we're going to develop. But you will have an opportunity to see that down the road. So, as the video above mentioned, textbook. As this video mentions, ReplIT. And between those two, that's all you're really going to need.